become a historian in the coolest sense of the word. So I want to take you on a little history lesson that hopefully will be fairly painless and hopefully will be kind of enjoyable. And it's the kind of history lesson that, before the pandemic, I used to get a whole bunch of kids, 400 kids, jammed into a gymnasium, which is called a multi-purpose room. It's not a good gymnasium, it's not a good auditorium, it's not a good lunchroom. But the janitor can convert it in a moment's notice, and you get all these little kids sitting on the floor looking up at me saying, "Okay, old man, impress us." So I decided that I would put together this little story that is more or less the history of America through its music. First of all, you think about the folks who came here on various ships. And the folks who came over on ships like the Mayflower, they had their idea about how music sounded. It had this scale. And you got from this note to this note in 7 steps. And they brought over music from Europe, and it sounded like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. You can sing with me if you want to. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Welcome to the White Methodist Church. The reason you know they're Methodists is because they've been singing the song 100 years, but they still check the text. The reason you know they're white is because of the way the song sounds. It lands right on the beat. And there's not a lot of improvisation going on in that song. It's like, amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Go 500 feet up the road. And in the Deep South, you have something called slavery. And the folks who are in slavery, they find they're not welcome in that church on the hill, but they decide to have their own church service because they're listening to the same gospel, usually from the same preacher, but somehow the music ends up not sounding the same. Out of the barn, you hear, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see, oh Lord, I see. Thank you. Now, what changes that song 500 feet down the road? It's kind of what I've depended on for my livelihood for the last 45 years. It's something called the folk process. If something's important in Europe, what do to save it? You write it down. You put it in a hymnal. You put that song in a hymnal, and your father learns, Amazing Grace. And you learn, Amazing Grace. And your son learns, Amazing Grace. And your great-great-great-great-granddaughter moves to Jonesboro, joins the glee club, and sings, Amazing Grace. It changes a little bit, but not much. But what happens, like stories, when you don't write them down, you pass them down. They keep changing, don't they? Your father sings one way and you sing another way, like a game of telephone when we were kids. Whisper something in your friend's ear, but by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's entirely different. Well, that happens in music too, especially before recordings. Your father used to sing, Amazing Grace. And little did you know that for you, it was not fancy enough. And you sang, Amazing Grace. And then your son fell in love with that pretty girl from Kentucky. with the blonde hair and the blue eyes, and she sang The Baby's Asleep, and she sang, Amazing Grace.